Now, President Joe Biden will meet with the family of George Floyd at the White House today to mark the first anniversary of his murder by a white police officer. Mr. Floyd's death shocked the world, led to mass protests and turned the spotlight on police reforms in the US and beyond. Noel Phillips has been to Yonkers, a city in New York which has changed its policing tactics to avoid deadly confrontations.
It's broad daylight in the city of Yonkers, and police are chasing a suspect with a loaded gun. What happens next is shocking. The man fires the gun 5 times.
Not one officer fired a shot. This guy fired into a crowded area with pedestrians and vehicles and there were bullet holes in windows and everything else. And not one officer fired a shot, and they de-escalated.
Like all of America's 18,000 police departments, Yonkers has had to change its way of policing and dealing with lethal force incidents following the murder of George Floyd. In the last year, the force has introduced body cams for all officers, as well as intelligence-led only tactics targeting offenders and de-escalation training on how to avoid deadly confrontations. In the summer of 2020, a critical moment in this country's history, Veronica and Anthony graduated Police Academy.
I think it's very important for women, especially women of color, to be represented in this field alone. And I think when I'm out in these streets and people see me, it gives them hope.
You know, there's going to be one bad apple of the group, okay? But not all of us entirely, most of us, and I could speak on behalf of most of the cops I've worked with in this department. Everybody here respects the public.
But for those wanting to change perceptions, it's hard enough being a police officer, especially when you're black.
I haven't lost friends, but people do look at you a little different. You do have a stronger burden to hold because they believe that, you know, there's a sense of betrayal. The way I overcome that is I show them I'm still the same person.
All eyes now on lawmakers to introduce reforms as America continues its search for ways to repair its bloody and tragic relationship between the police and black community. Noel Phillips, Good Morning Britain in Yonkers.
And I'm joined now by Commissioner John Mueller from the Yonkers Police Department in New York. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We saw there some of the changes that you've made, the focus on de-escalation, but just talk us through what you think the most important changes are that you've brought in since the death of George Floyd to try to make sure something like that doesn't happen within your department.
I think one of the most important things that we've seen is the concept of procedural justice. Procedural justice was put forth in the 21st century policing model through President Barack Obama. And it has, there are 4 pillars. The first pillar is to explain why you're doing what you're doing, to be clear about it and transparent. The second is to give someone a voice. The third is mental health and wellness, and the fourth is to come forward in being very objective. So there are 64 million interactions in the United States every year with police. So it's very important that when we interact with someone, and most people only interact 3 or 4 times in their entire life, that we get it right.
And a number of other states and cities, other departments have also made changes, but is it enough to make the real difference? Do you believe that another killing like that of George Floyd could still happen today in the United States?
Yes, it can still happen. I think I like to use the term and draw a parallel with the pandemic. You know, what are we doing to vaccinate ourselves to make sure that although it can happen when you have all these different variables and you have humans involved, we can keep it as unlikely as possible. So we have to vaccinate ourselves. We have to do community outreach. We have to improve training. We have to make sure that we engage in precision policing. We show respect. All of these different things, and more research too, because the police profession is one of the most under-researched professions anywhere, and it's kind of shocking that that's the case. But we need to partner with academic institutions as well to make sure we're understanding best practice, what evidence-based research tells us.
How much damage do you think has been done to police reputation because of what's happened, and how do you think you'll be able to regain people's trust?
I think it's, well, for the first question, I think there's been terrible damage, but we're looking towards a brighter day. Police departments all over the United States. You're talking about 18,000 police departments. You're talking about 800,000 police officers. Each department is different. We don't have one larger department like many countries in Europe. So you have to really zero in on exactly what each department is doing well and why they're doing it well and what they need to improve upon. And so when you do that, we can't do this with a chainsaw. It has to be done with a scalpel. You go department by department, officer by officer. You look at the metrics. You try to figure out what we need to do in each police department, and that's how we get better.
OK, Commissioner John Mueller from the Yonkers Police Department, thanks very much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. Good morning, Britain.